traditional finance advice does not include the Black tax. So again, this focus on rules, always do this, never do this, doesn't apply if, the rules are different for you, right? So traditionally, real estate might be a good investment, but if you buy real estate in a Black neighborhood because that's where you can afford or that's where you prefer to be to send your children to school, the likelihood that your real estate is going to be valued at the same level as a white counterpart across town is rare. And even if you do all the right things, even if you buy that big, beautiful house in a white neighborhood in great school system, if you get the wrong appraiser, you're fucked, right?
We talked about that, I think, episode 4 with Tiffany Alicia. Literally had that experience where, she's a Black woman, financial expert, and had her house appraised. I think she said like $300,000 less.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. We're going to look back at this time and be like, yo, why was this acceptable? Right? Like, it's the same way I look back at my grandmother. My grandmother just turned 90 last year or this year. And she was born on a sharecropper field. And she was just so happy to be there. Like, she liked going to the field. She tells me the story. Like, she used to cry when her dad would leave her back at home. She didn't know any better. She didn't have anything to compare it to. Right? So when we look at the stats today and they're dismal, Black women making 67 cents to $1, white women in general making 80 something cents to $1, you start to like realize like this shit makes absolutely no sense and it doesn't have to be this way. And so I think in the interim, what personal finance advice needs to be doing is selling us like, yo, financial independence, these aggressive savings rates, these, big goals, this push that we're trying to get y'all to sign up for is really just to remain on parity, right? Like, yes, the traditional advice is to save 10%, but when you make 40% less, you got to save 30%. You got to get a side hustle. You might need to start a business. You might need to look at a different type of investment. And it doesn't do that. Like instead, it defaults to it being personal finance advice, defaults to the easy, clean math that comes with being at the top of the social food chain, so to speak, right? You don't encounter nearly as many hurdles or barriers as you would if you were a woman or a marginalized person.
Yeah, this is the third time that we're going to reference calculus. I don't know why, but literally in our book, we talk about like the math being simple, but Black life isn't. It just isn't that simple, right? Yeah. And so the math is the same. You're right. It's not as if compounding interest works differently for people of color or women than anyone else, but there are forces outside of the math, right? There are all of these other things. You talked about all of the boogeymen, all the other bad isms out there that are just impacting our lives. And that's really where things get a little bit complicated. So yeah, I think it's really, really difficult. And I think as people who, I would consider us to some extent leaders in the space with respect to that community. Sometimes it almost feels like there's that cliche scene in a Marvel movie where there's a train that's running off the tracks and you're like, standing there, whether you're Hulk or Batman or whatever it is, and you're trying to stop this thing before it falls off the track, and you're just getting beaten up and tattered. But this thing is moving really, really fast, and like, wealth decline and wealth inequality is a massive, massive and complicated thing. What we're trying to do is not be the superhero, actually, because I'm literally not a superhero. But what I can do is, as someone that's on that train with you, say, all right, well, what can we do? Like, there's this much runway. Look, there's an escape route up here. There's our options over here, which will require us to think a little bit differently. We might need to tap into some bite size of courage to sort of move a little further to maybe delay this thing, give us some time to think, right? So that's the way that we kind of think about it a bit more creatively. But the reality is, like, policy got us into this shit. Policy is going to get us out of it.
Yeah. One of the things I struggle with most in my work, and specifically with writing my book, is I don't like capitalism, right? Like I don't want to win capitalism, because that means deep suffering for somebody else, right? I've exploited somebody, right? If I have billions of dollars, I've probably exploited somebody. But I also can't afford to lose capitalism, because that means deep suffering for myself and my family and my community. Mm-hmm. And I imagine as Black people, you feel that 10 times harder. Mm-hmm. How do you reckon with that? Because I'm struggling with it too. My answer is like, I have to teach you how to get your groceries and pay your rent, and then once you're taken care of, then we fuck the system up. But like, I also don't want to participate, but you kind of have to unless you're going off the grid in Alaska somewhere and getting a Discovery Channel show. But like, that's it, right? It's either like you have to participate and hopefully, I guess, do the least harm you can.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts with it? Because it's something I've deeply struggled with.
I struggle with it. Like Kiersten will tell you, like, and we both do, but I think like it's like in my nature. I've always been that way because I came from the mud. You know what I mean? The way that I think about it is the same way I think about if I were climbing a mountain, even if it's just like one of them fake mountains at like a rec center or something like that. If you're climbing a mountain and you try to strap on like a couple weights on your back, you tie some things to your ankle, it's really, really hard. There are other ways to do this, right? You could say, you know what? I trust that you're going to be good where you are. I'm skilled, I'm able, I have resources, I'm probably best suited to climb this mountain. But when I get up there, I'm going to use my resources to do something. I can throw a rope down. Shit, I might be able to rent a helicopter. I might be able to, write something and send it back down to you, right? But like, I think too many of us, members of marginalized groups, are afraid of sort of losing that point of connection, right? Because the higher you climb, the further away you get from your community.
And the guilt.
Of 100%. Survivor's guilt. I call it success guilt, right? It's something we struggle with. But it's really just helping people like us to redefine what help looks like as well. It's like, listen, when I get there, I need you to trust that I'm going to do everything that I can. And in fact, you might be able to do a much better job. You might be able to bring far more people with you.
Or maybe I hike back down the mountain, but I know the path now and I can help you back up, right?
Correct. And that's really how we think about the book. It's like, listen, the math is simple, right? The process is simple. All those things are simple. But here's what you will have to navigate as you're going up. You're going to see some bears once you hit this point. This is when the weather is going to change. This is when the oxygen levels are going to adjust. And so you might want to pause a little bit.
The racism, the sexism, the wage gap.
Exactly.
The capitalism.
Capitalism, right?
It's another ism.
So that's the way that we think about it. It's not easy, but I do have to remind myself that is far more effective of a tool than just sort of committing to strap everyone on your back and to carry the weight of that responsibility with you while you're climbing, because that can be detrimental to yourself, your own physical well-being. And it's the old cliche of sort of putting on your mask first. I think it's relevant. And by the way,
in Financial Feminist, I call it oxygen mask finances. You got to put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others.
And by the way, as a student of Black history, this is not a new issue, right? Like you can go back to studying like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois are two like major historical figures in the Black community, and they butted heads on this issue, right? They had very different points of view on how we wanted to sort of move the race forward, right? And so this is not new. So if anyone else is dealing with these issues or struggling with that, I'm confident that if you study history, you're going to find other leaders that were before you struggled with the exact same thing. And so you have the benefit of sort of looking at that, maybe reading some of their autobiographies and things like that to see what they were thinking. And I think using that as a bit of a guide or a cheat code to help you process what you're feeling.
Yeah, I think, I would just echo everything you said. We're all, as Berna says, we're all compromised under capitalism, but my theory is to focus on the areas that you find to be problematic in your life, right? There are lots of things that I'm annoyed by. There are lots of things I don't like and have opinions about, but my time and my energy goes to the areas that are problematic in my life. And to quote another creator, Rachel Rogers, it's really hard to be a feminist if you're broke, right? It's hard to take the actions that you need to walk away from situations, to support causes, to raise hell and use your voice without feeling like you're risking your livelihood. It's really hard to do those things if you don't have, this underpinning. Like in the United States, movements require funding, right? Becoming elected as president requires billions of dollars. Like it's not great, but that's what we're living in right now. It doesn't mean that it can't change. There was a time where tulips were the most valuable thing on earth and bananas were like a super important export or import. Like things will eventually change. Again, if you're a student of history, you know that there were wonky beliefs that we've always held as a country that we eventually get rid of. And to me, that's why I'm bullish on the creator economy, because somebody has to put the idea out there. We can't just keep depending on politicians to create these ideas and push society forward. We got to, like you said, meet people where they at. If they on TikTok, well, let me go on TikTok and introduce you to this new concept and what you could be doing and how this has a ripple effect, right? So it's a hard question to answer, but I think if we start to think smaller, if we start to think about our neighborhoods, the communities that we can create, whether they're digital or in real life, we can start to build momentum. This is what grassroots organizers have been doing. It's a long fight. They absolutely knew that Roe was going to be under attack. Why? Because they're grassroots organizers, and because the opponents have been saying the same thing for the last 30 years. They just got the stamina and the financial resources to fight a fight for 30 years until they get that shit overturned. We need to be in the same position to do that as well for the things that we care about. You got to have the stamina. You got to have gas in the tank, which requires the financial wherewithal to take breaks as you need them or to walk away from situations that diminish your light.
Well, that's cashing out, right? Like, that's the idea.
Period.
Yeah. And my neck hurts from like nodding incessantly.